Education in general is not a topic very many people talk about unless it's actively relevant to them in some way. Whether it's because they're currently in school, considering returning to school, or, like me, are a recent graduated teacher. My name is Cream. I've been playing Overwatch since it launched back in 2016, and I found my studies and my Masters of Primary Education actively modifying how I engage with the world around me, with a radical emphasis on anything remotely education related. Something about the learning process and the ability to impart the light bulb effect onto people, especially when it's related to video games, it hits me just right. When it comes to the process of game education and learning how to engage with online games, I don't really see coaches or aspiring learners talking about this in any capacity, unless prompted directly. And it got me wondering, why doesn't anyone talk about this? The thing with game education is that people don't think about it because games are designed primarily for entertainment. Fun factor is the driving force to creating a video game. It's arguably more important than the monetary factor, unless you're a big, greedy corporation. As a result, most games only feature a tutorial on the absolute most basic features of a game. Things like moving, looking, how to use a weapon if applicable, and core components like performing objectives and the designated interacting methods of the game. Basic tutorial methods like this make it so that the player's general engagement with the game is enough to very slowly drip feed them more concepts and ideas over the time they choose to sink into the game. For example, Helldivers 2 has a fantastic tutorial because it covers all of the absolute basics, and the game is designed so that a new player doesn't need anything more than these basics to enjoy the game and interact with it. Not to mention it's designed and delivered in an engaging and funny way. There are no leaps or bounds the players need to take to learn things, just simple steps. Players can easily take their time to learn and discover other key mechanics and strategies to further enhance their gameplay because there are no pitfalls for taking your time. It may be online, but it's not PvP, it's PvE, so there's no rush to learn the game any faster than any of the other players. Or, for a single player example, let's look at Tunic, an indie puzzle platformer that delivers its tutorial and lore as you play the game in the single most unique way I've ever seen. I would highly recommend playing this game. I don't even know how far through it I am, but I'm having an absolute blast playing it. The player is exposed to new concepts and core mechanics of the game, both simple and complex, through the acquisition of tutorial pages as they progress through the game. Like Helldivers, there is no real punishment for taking your time to learn how to engage with Tunic, as the puzzle part of the game kinda emphasizes taking your time. Also, it's single player, so the learning curve is significantly more relaxed. And again, the player is exposed to these things in small steps as they need them. There are no massive leaps or bounds that act like huge hurdles one must overcome. At least not until the very end of the game, where I've heard you actually need to create a cipher and translate the game's unique language to fully complete it. Fuck, I can't wait for that. Comparatively, Overwatch, the main focus of this video, has a very underwhelming tutorial for the type of game it is. Having just a basic, stock standard process like Helldivers, Overwatch delivers this tutorial quite well, but unlike most games, having just a basic process isn't enough. It's wildly out of sync with both the rate and amount of content players are exposed to, almost to a damaging degree. Because the game is PvP, players are essentially in a race to learn the game better than the players they are facing off against. And due to the sheer variety in hero choice and gimmicks, new players who jump into Overwatch are expected to infer most of the rules behind everything they see and encounter, because so few of them are explicitly established upon entry into the game. Problem is, inference only works as a strategy when the learners already have a baseline of knowledge to work from and can actually infer how things may work at a glance. Those who play Overwatch frequently know that even with experience, inferring rules in this game can be risky due to the absolutely obscene amount of exceptions there are, and this will only get worse as the game updates and becomes naturally more complex. Combining the type of game Overwatch is, and the amount of content players are exposed to in such a short time, without proper explanation, Overwatch creates an environment that is not learning friendly in the slightest, making everyone's learning experience significantly more difficult than it realistically should be. Even with the new player restrictions on hero selection, this rate is still lopsided, as it doesn't exactly limit what the new players are exposed to on enemy teams. I even went and created a fresh account to double check this. While systems have been set up so that the first time user experience is smooth and exposes players to the game in very small steps, for some reason the developers chose to include accelerated progression into this introductory process in the form of wins grant double progress. While I can't exactly take issue with the idea of fast-tracking progression, seeing as player attention is also an important factor in most modern games, life service cringe! I can absolutely take issue with the way it's implemented. Fast tracking through wins grant double progress incentivizes players to take a win-first mindset and forego properly learning how to interact with the game. It's literally reinforcing the idea that winning comes before all else, which is an incredibly toxic attitude to push for a video game, unless you're aiming to engage people from a purely competitive standpoint, but that's an entirely different thing. From my own experience, this mindset can suck the enjoyment out of playing the game entirely, not just for one player. I got so absorbed by this idea at one point that it almost cost me my relationship with some of my closest friends. It's a deceptively easy way of thinking to fall into, and a bit difficult to recognize unless you have friends willing to tell you that you're doing it. So featuring this in the introduction process of the game only adds to the series of problems new players face when they join the Overwatch community. I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about this or even acknowledge that this is a thing and problem that just exists here. I can also tell you that if a kid in a classroom gets something right by accident or uses the wrong kind of thinking to get there, they don't advance faster. That's not how learning works, it's stupid. You can't jam acceleration features like this into the introductory stages of a game and expect good results long term. It only needs to be made easy and enjoyable to learn, not faster to learn. The easier something is to pick up and the more approachable a game is to learn, the more likely a player will be to stick around with it, even if they're late to the party and the wider player base is already significantly better than they are. The sheer complexity provided by each hero's abilities means that Overwatch isn't as caught up in the mechanical arms race like a lot of other FPS games are. If you haven't seen this video, I would highly recommend watching it. It's a fantastic take on the state of PvP FPS games. Getting good at Overwatch isn't totally reliant on a player's mechanical skill, so players don't need to be fast-tracked into the game for the sake of retention if they can simply enjoy learning and understanding its complexity and nuance while they play it. A quick side note, while checking all of this out, I also discovered several flaws in the way new players progress through the early stages of the game, which only adds more hurdles to their learning journeys. Irrelevant to this fast-track mechanic, the odds tell us that a new player will have unlocked competitive play before reaching anywhere between the 75 to 150 games required to play to unlock all the heroes. With how Overwatch 2's environment has been curated, having all the heroes at your disposal is a core part of playing the game competitively, let alone at all. I don't need to remind everyone what happened during Malga's launch, do I?
No way. No way. No fucking way. No fucking way he leaves to buy the battle pass. No fucking way he leaves to buy the no way. There's no way.
Wait, did he go buy it?
If he fucking
Bro,
he fucking did.
If he just bought the battle
There's
pass,
no
bro.
fucking way.
He bought it! He bought it! What the
Bro.
Even if we assume that someone beats the impossible odds and wins the first 50 games of Overwatch they play, they still do not have all of the heroes available to them to play the game in a properly competitive way, even with the accelerated progression mechanic. In the same vein, complex communication features such as text and voice chat in Overwatch are heavily restricted to newer players until they engage with certain elements of the game and meet specific criteria that they are not explicitly told about. For a game the developers believe to be more competitively oriented than casually oriented, restricting communication this badly right out of the gate is a bit of a weird move, given how important complex communication is to being strategic and competitive. Now, these restrictions were applied as an effort to combat toxic behaviours. I get that. But there are probably better solutions to combating poor behaviour that don't involve taking features away from the player, and would likely prove to be equally as effective. From memory, a non-destructive approach to combating toxic chat was never attempted. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they tried a series of smaller destructive approaches until we eventually got to where we are now. That was a long tangent. I promise not to do that again. But the point is, the tools and systems as they are do not work well enough. They are not sustainable for the kind of game Overwatch has been curated to be. So can these problems be solved? Not entirely, but they can be eased, and their effectiveness depends entirely on the quality of learning tools and systems designed for the game. So how come nobody talks about it when these tools are lacking or straight up non-existent? Well, you can't exactly talk about the things you're not aware of. And you'd think this kind of problem would be the first thing new players would encounter. However, Overwatch does such a fantastic job at capturing the players in the wonder, creativity, and amazement of the game itself, that learning the ins and outs kinda fall to the wayside and are largely forgotten. This is what I believe to be the core reason we have such wildly variable perceptions of the state of the game and balance of heroes across the community. And it leaves us with a burning question. Where are the necessary learning tools for Overwatch? And why does nobody seem to talk about this as a core problem of the game? We'll start by breaking down what Overwatch is. This may take a bit of time, so bear with me. Overwatch is an incredibly complicated, team-based FPS game. That is the most concise way you can put it. While it is based on most basic FPS principles and mechanics like moving and shooting, the innovative twist this game offers compared to something standard like Call of Duty or Counter-Strike is that it incorporates some extra elements in the forms of classes or roles with accompanied gimmicks and abilities that make each hero entirely unique. All of these things add complexity to modify and enhance the core FPS elements of the game. That complexity is what people tend to get hung up on the most, as there is such a wide range of heroes with varietal abilities and HUD elements to track and understand. This is the main hurdle everyone needs to overcome to engage with Overwatch at all. And the game does outline and explain all of these elements to the player, but they aren't the game's core, just the first engagement hurdle. We're fast approaching to the 9th anniversary now, so players and devs alike have had ample time to dissect and analyse this game to within an inch of its life. This has brought us things like competitive theory, featuring poke, dive, and brawl, which serve as the bedrock of gameplay styles and a framework to outline character archetyping to fit into these compositions. We as a community have designed rules and guidelines for how these things can interact with each other and with the game environment around them. We spent time as a community with our developer caps on and tried to outline what could be considered healthy or unhealthy for the game. On top of all that, a small group of people have deep dived this game so hard that they could probably get some kind of doctorate just by writing a thesis on Overwatch theory if they just wanted to. Individual hero, compositional, and map-based theories are what people tend to focus on the most when they elevate their engagement with Overwatch. These are actually more on the middle to advanced side of this game's learning curve though. All of these are centered around individual heroes and their gimmicks, which is not a bad thing to focus on, but like we said, these gimmicks aren't the core of the game, merely enhancements to it. The big things almost everyone forgets are the two fundamental PvP rules of control and resource management. These two elements make up the most fundamental core of every PvP game in existence. They far outweigh the importance of ingredients like genre or style, as those only dictate what flavor of these two elements the player engages with. FPS games add aiming, moving, and shooting to this recipe. More strategy-focused games may include the fog of war and turn information into a core tool. Some games incorporate or revolve around team-based play, while others lean into the solo aspect in some way, shape, or form. And from game to game, the resources are designed and presented radically differently. Now this is a gross oversimplification of PvP games, but that doesn't matter right now because we want to focus back in on Overwatch and why the game's design can make these things difficult to understand. Starting with resource management, we must first define what a resource is. A resource is a tool the player uses to interact with the game in a way that favours their side of the engagement. This is a core, fundamental concept relevant to literally every game on the market, not just PvP or FPS games. It is the what players use to engage with a game. In Overwatch, the weapons and abilities each hero possesses are the resources the player needs to manage. They need to manage their own resources while tracking and managing their allies' resources alongside the enemy team's resources if they want to be successful. For a quick example, a commonly overlooked idea is that health is a resource. Not many players actually recognize this. Now that's a lot to take in, with a maximum of 10 heroes to track at any given time, with variable amounts of resources within this 10 to also keep track of. It's usually the first thing to overwhelm people, and it's one of the most asked about things from players when they begin their learning journey with Overwatch. This concept of resource management is the driving force that dictates the second core fundamental of PvP games. The second core is control. In Overwatch, control has been framed as the concept of space, and it can be a bit of a muddy topic to talk about. Control is the why players use and track the resources they and the enemy team have. Players must spend these resources wisely and effectively to take and maintain control of areas within the map they need to be in control of. This concept applies to all of the heroes in the game, but none of them more so than tanks, and this is where the conversation tends to get murky. You can and should be taking and controlling space with any role, even though the concept is kind of abstract. But tanks specifically are significantly more focused on this concept because they make up the bulk of the team. They are the backbone and the beef, so to speak. They are the guys people tend to spend most of the resources on to knock down or keep up, and they are the least forgiving role when it comes to resource management, so they must be the most careful when using them to exert or maintain control. This comes along with the fact that the value gained from taking and controlling space is presented radically differently from tank to tank, compared to the same thing presented from a DPS or a support perspective. No two tanks do the same thing the same way, and with only one per team, people are often incapable of reading when their tank has taken and is controlling space because there are so many different ways to interpret the action. These two concepts are the absolute core fundamentals that drive the gameplay loop of Overwatch. Everything else is an extension of this prerogative, and serves to add complexity, depth, and nuance to the gameplay experience. So why are these concepts difficult to grasp for new players? If you ask me, it's because both of these things are, by their very nature, abstract concepts. They are not simple, tangible things you can just grasp. Space control is a totally invisible concept unless something big and obvious is there to communicate it, and it's entirely dictated by the player's understanding of resources and their management. No understanding of either of these things means there's no recognition of space. Further to that, a player must know what each resource means and the power they hold to use and manage them correctly. No understanding means there's no management of resources. Neither of these concepts are even hinted at or implied within the game's current learning tools, and only some external tools cover them. Even then, they're often relegated to focusing on a single hero in the form of guides, rather than covering the whole battlefield more holistically. Baking these ideas more explicitly into the game is a good starting point, along with creating more tools and utilities to outline other essential concepts and ideas the players will use and interact with in the game while they play it. Some examples of things these tools can cover include PvP fundamentals. How do we play a PvP game? We just talked about space control and resource management. FPS fundamentals, aiming, moving, and shooting. What is hitscan? What is a projectile? Controls and key bindings. Playable characters or role guides. What are the roles? Their goals. How do they play and interact within the game? Maps and modes. Or, if they really want to, Overwatch theory. These things not being clearly defined and easily accessible is why when we summarize performance and skill at each rank, we get something that looks like this. Unfortunately, as jokey and memey as these summaries look, I'd call them kind of accurate, which isn't exactly a good thing if you ask me. Ideally, we'd have more learning tools to work with to raise the player's base innate skill, and have a scale that looks something more like this. Now, I'm fully aware that this version of the scale is a pipe dream. Just let me have this. Let me have my dreams. Some of these things will be harder to define than others. Some might have a definition that is perpetually changing, and others might not even have a fully established definition yet. Having a foundational guide to meaningful engagement with the game is a critically important element of any game, and the game's design and complexity will depend on what this foundation must include. Overwatch, for example, is a team-based FPS that has... Oh, Jesus Christ. 42 different playable characters with a total of 238 different weapons, abilities, and gimmicks. With an insane number of unique ways everything can interact with one another. To a new player, it's like looking at a hedge. On the outside, it looks really pretty, clean, and well sculpted. But when you peel back the outer layer, it's like looking at the inner workings of an actual hedge. It just looks like a total fucking mess. On top of that, it just grows a new branch every few months that just adds to the mess underneath. Overwatch has an expansive network of complexity, naturally baked into it, but does not explain any of it clearly enough to be even remotely helpful for new players. With that in mind, what does Overwatch have? What is it missing? And what does it need for people to understand this game better? As we mentioned earlier, Overwatch has some learning tools baked into it. 2 to be precise. Technically 4 depending on how loose your definition of a learning tool is. First up, we have a plain old tutorial that operates more like a welcome to FPS gaming kind of tutorial than a welcome to Overwatch tutorial. It introduces the player to most of the basic gameplay controls and HUD elements of Overwatch, alongside some of the most basic FPS concepts like eliminating enemies and capturing an objective. It is, for all intents and purposes, a fine tutorial, as it helps guide the players into overcoming the first hurdle of engagement, the "what the fuck am I looking at" stage. But notice how I said most controls and HUD elements. I was able to identify 5 things the tutorial does not tell the player about, only one of which I would consider an acceptable oversight. Starting off, the tutorial doesn't tell players that they can crouch. Like, straight up. I don't know why it wouldn't, but it doesn't. Some people might argue, you don't need to be told that you should crouch, you should just know how to do it. To which I say, you needed to be told when you first began playing games, you just don't remember, shut up and listen. It also doesn't explain that pressing tab shows the player a scoreboard, or for Overwatch 1 when this tutorial was created, a personal profile of their performance for that game. We should at least see the old screen from the last game, but pressing tab does absolutely nothing, and it's a mildly important thing to show the player. The game very clearly shows the player their ultimate, and then tells them that they need to charge it to use it. This is good, but it doesn't indicate to us that damaging things isn't the only way to charge it. You also charge it passively, by just existing, or through healing other allies. The tutorial also exposes the player to what a damage indicator is, but in this context, this indicator can fly by the player, since there's no explicit mention of what it is or what it means. This leads us to our final element, the health bar UI. Specifically, this little shitter right here, and all of its accompanying indicators. They aren't covered at all. This is the only part of the tutorial I'm willing to give a pass on, because this entire part of the game was added so much later into the cycle that accounting for it in the tutorial probably wasn't even on the to-do list when creating it. The same can also be said for the new perks system that's just been released. That's about as far as it goes, and some things might seem like insane nitpicks, but for a welcome to FPS gaming type tutorial, these things simply can't be left out and require explicit outlining. It's not all bad though. The game does prompt new players to try versus AI games alongside quick play. Versus AI is a little bit like quick play light, and has varying difficulties the player can choose based on their comfort. The tutorial has the makings to be really, really good, and does quite a lot of things really well already, like the UI introduction, and the way it very, very clearly introduces and demonstrates basic concepts of the game. The feeling and atmosphere of the tutorial are also really nice. It doesn't feel like your stock standard tutorial, and I can't exactly pin down why, but I really enjoyed the feel of this tutorial. Next up, we have the F1 screens. These screens are little info blurbs tied to each hero in the game, and when you jump into the practice range for the first time ever, the game makes these screens known to you, and requires you interact with them to progress, though the UI ping for this button is a little bit off the mark. They show you very minimal and at times vague descriptions of the weapons and abilities available to whoever you choose in the hero selection. Some of these screens are pretty good, specifically those tied to the Overwatch 2 release heroes. All of them, however, require a lot of work to be better, and overall don't provide enough critical gameplay information to realistically be called a learning tool, which is just a bit of a problem considering these are the things designed to teach players about the heroes they can play. Luckily for us, these are actually being fixed up in the very near future. Thank you, Gavin, you are the coolest. Our 2 technical additions to this learning tool roster are the practice range and hero mastery courses. I do not explicitly consider these to be learning tools per se, but they can be used as such. The practice range is an open space filled with a variety of bots, mechanics, and activities for the player to mess around with. It's a space that cultivates self-directed learning, which is a very well-researched teaching strategy used across a myriad of classrooms around the whole world. When players enter the practice range for the first time, they're given an extensive walkthrough on the hero selection screen and are prompted by Athena, the administrative voice of the game, to regularly use the space to experiment with new things. I love this! 10 out of 10. It's an absolutely perfect approach. I can't fault it. It would be literally flawless execution if some other facets of the game actually pulled their weight a little bit. Hero mastery courses are not quite as their namesake might indicate. They don't teach you more in-depth ins and outs of their respective heroes, or set out a path towards mastering their playstyles. These are unfortunately glorified speedrun courses, and that's the most disappointing thing about them. I held out a lot of hope for them when they were first announced and was let down pretty hard when they launched. They rely on the player already having something of a knowledge base about the hero they've chosen to engage with to do the course at all. Which is good. There should be a next step kind of tool in the game, but those kinds of tools need to at least hint towards some nuances and depth each hero can reach, not just throw someone in an obstacle course and yell, "Go!" One more thing that aids new players in their learning journey is the new player matchmaking. Now, this isn't a tool the player actively uses to progress their learning, but rather a facilitator for it. The new player matchmaking restricts what it deems to be new players to only play against other new players up until a certain point. This means everyone's learning journey is a group journey, like a classroom. Everyone is exposed to new things at a very similar rate, meaning there is less chance for them to be overwhelmed by the absolute insanity of the game, and more opportunity for them to grasp key ideas within the gameplay loop. It doubles up as a positive influence on player retention too. Nobody wants to get stomped the moment they begin playing a new game. That just doesn't feel good. Like the practice range, this is also a very good tool to have in the game, even if it's not an active one. Of course, there are ways to circumvent this, but we're going to ignore that for now. For the most part, this system works, because other subsystems within this seek to detect if you are genuinely a new player, a returning player after a lengthy break, someone playing on a fresh, alternate account, or anything in between. While it does all of this, it's also silently guessing and measuring your ELO, or skill rating, so it can make better matches for you in the future and build retention, but that's a whole other extra part we're not going to talk about today. Looking at it all outlined, there are a few tools built into the game, but I wouldn't say any of them are very effective at teaching the game to the player. They are all thin and low quality, but have the foundations and potential to be extremely dense, and of a quality so high I don't think anything else can possibly compare. With that in mind, let's inspect the tools at our disposal beyond the bounds of the game, some of which can be equally as detrimental as they are beneficial. Like every other game in existence, there are a series of learning tools and resources outside of the game for the player to access. For Overwatch, pretty much all of these external resources drive and facilitate gameplay learning significantly more than the in-game tools do. These external tools are mostly covering for the lack of simplistic tools and utilities that should be in the game, rather than promoting deeper, more nuanced exploration around it. Things like wiki pages provide sets of highly detailed information on each hero with some tips and pointers on how one can and should try to play them. There's no discussion to be had on a wiki, it's just an information page that aims to provide all of the basic information the game provides, plus a selection of complex and nuanced information the game doesn't provide. Unfortunately, the wikis currently act as a bedrock for basic hero information like damage and healing numbers, because the game simply doesn't provide that information to us at the moment. There is a glaring problem with this. Wikis require constant maintenance to remain relevant and up to date. Without that, they fall by the wayside and become irrelevant at best and detrimental at worst. I'll use the Doomfist wiki page as an example, as I'm directly responsible for 99% of the gameplay information on this page. I wrote and created all of this, with the help from multiple highly skilled Doomfist specialists. This page is the most up-to-date and fleshed out Overwatch wiki page in any Overwatch wiki system, and it's not even anywhere near complete. Wikis require a set of intensely dedicated people behind them to function at all. On top of that, each hero page would require at least one highly dedicated specialist to ensure that the information on the page is correct and, in a sense, practical. Speaking of practicality, our next set of tools are probably the most practical and convenient tools to engage with, because they also come with an element of entertainment. Content creators. Content creators help to drive engagement with the game and promote discussion and learning around it with varying levels of nuance and depth. They're casual, easy to watch, and present players with multiple learning methods whether they realize it or not. Creators give raw game information and help correct misunderstandings, impart concepts and ideas to dispel misconceptions, and probably the most subtle of them all, they present gameplay to watch and learn from. Whether we like a creator's gameplay or not, odds are we've subconsciously learned at least one thing from watching a content creator just play the game. Subconscious emulation and imitation are insanely powerful tools. Aside from doing their own thing as content creators and earning money, the Overwatch creators also serve as a bridge between the developers and the broader community, where thoughts, ideas, criticism, and more can pile up to be distilled and refined within their respective communities for highly variable takes and perspectives on the state of the game. This is also where another learning tool has formed for the community to engage with. No matter what the topic is, a community of people always forms and creates a space where they can chat about said interest. Message boards and forums like Discord communities, Reddit, the Blizzard forums to an extent, and dare I include YouTube comments, are spaces where people can discuss any facet of the game they feel like. These spaces are fantastic, as they are totally public and extremely easy to access, which allows discussion and learning to thrive. The only problem with them is, they are totally public and extremely easy to access. To keep a very, very long tangent short, people suck, which can often make public spaces like these highly volatile, and sometimes even downright hostile to anything that does not match their established way of collective thinking. While discussion in these spaces is constant, unless it is specifically cultivated to hold a high standard, it can spiral wildly out of whack, generating and perpetuating the wrong kinds of things like bad faith discussions that devolve into your classic internet insults and arguments. Now, I don't mean to paint these spaces in a negative light, just to highlight some of the risks behind them if they're not held to high standards. YouTube comments and the Blizzard forums, for example, are spaces I would consider low quality, as there is no standard upheld in these spaces, and engagement here can get kinda weird. In contrast, spaces like Reddit and content creator discords can be incredibly high quality because they are actively holding themselves to a high level of standard. Content creator discords specifically are some of the highest quality, as creators don't act as megaphones for the pooled ideas in these spaces and further perpetuate them, but instead they are facilitators and contributors for these discussions to create and refine new thoughts and ideas. Creators like Spylo, for example, constantly emphasize the importance of players formulating their own thoughts before listening to literally anyone and then comparing them so that the discussion he facilitates can maintain a high level of quality, depth, and nuance.
As always, don't just take my word for it. Come up with your own opinions. In fact, I'd actually recommend before you even watch this video, go look at the patch notes yourself, form your own conclusions about the details, and then come compare the notes with me. Just because I'm a content creator, just because of a platform, doesn't mean that I'm always right. If you disagree with anything in the comments, if you disagree with anything, please do leave it in the comments.
This kind of attitude also bleeds into his coaching sessions. Coaching sessions are the most direct and tangible form of game education available to the community. It cultivates a teacher-student relationship between players with the direct aim of teaching someone about whatever the game elements they need assistance with, typically focusing on 3 more tangible gaming concepts and weaving the 2 core PvP fundamentals throughout. Coaching is a fantastic thing. It's actually a part of what drove me to persist through my teaching degree. There's just one problem with it, and considering what the other external tools have to deal with, it's pretty minor in comparison. Relevance. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there are good coaches, there are bad coaches, free coaches, paid coaches. Now, free does not mean bad, nor does paid mean good. That's not how things work here. When I have the time and energy, I give free coaching to aspiring Doom players, and my most successful student climbed from the edge of silver all the way to masters, and might still be climbing. I don't know, I haven't checked in with them recently. They likely wouldn't have encountered me if they had been a more casual player though, because coaching is a very die-hard thing to seek. Casual players don't want someone to coach them in the game, they just want to play it. Head empty, no thought, funny abilities go brr. While it is the most effective way to learn the game, and perpetuates positive attitudes in the community, it's not a casual-oriented thing. Not like content creators are, which means a significant portion of the player base simply doesn't engage with coaching. Now, like we did with the tools within the game, let's take a step back and take in everything we have to work with. We have a lot of things to work with here, with theoretically the highest grade resources you can find, even better than what the game can offer. Being publicly driven means that each of these suffers from lack of reliable quality control though, which makes these tools incredibly volatile and sometimes unclear. So how about we shift back into a more stable solution? Now, we've highlighted all the tools at the player's disposal, both within and beyond the bounds of the game, along with the things they succeed in and fail to accomplish. I want to inspect and offer concepts and improvements to each of the internal tools. Internal tools are what we lack the most. will have the most impact once changed, and is realistically the only thing developers actually have the direct power to change. The added benefit of applying more resources to building up the in-game tools is that it affects the flow out into the external resources, and actively affects how those are used as well. The more there is in the game for the players to engage with, the more there is to talk about beyond it. So, let's see what we can do. Recounting the internal tools we identified, we have a basic FPS tutorial, some short, vague blurbs on each hero, and the practice range. Starting with the practice range, this is the only thing that needs no changes. This space has already been modified once in the past for heightened interactivity, which ended up in my opinion to be a huge success. The only two things I argue it could use are role queue rules, so the interactive hero swapper can provide accurate tank health pools when swapping in tank bots, and visual indicators for healing and damage numbers, so players can mess around on their own and have an extra element to work with and help them understand the hero they're messing about with. Yes, there are workshop codes to do this kind of thing, but why do we need to finish building the foundational tools for the game here? Moving on to the tutorial, I've already outlined its missing features, and honestly, for a basic welcome to Overwatch FPS tutorial, it works. All it needs are those little things it's omitted. Tell us that there's a scoreboard. Show us what a damage indicator is. Explain earning ultimate charge a little bit more in depth. Tell us about the passives and how the DPS passive is represented on the UI. Tell us how the perks UI works. And as dumb as this sounds, tell the player that they can fucking crouch, man. It's a part of the basic movement set in the game. You just can't omit that. A couple of extra tidbits that should also be added to this tutorial are more explicit outlines of the projectile types, defining hit scan and projectile along with each objective type. Show the player what capturing a static point is like, then show them what pushing a payload is like, then the push bot, and the difference in tick speed between King of the Hill and Flashpoint maps, given they operate virtually the same way. Even touching upon capture rates with 1, 2, and 3 players would be useful. Lastly, we have the F1 screens. I won't sugarcoat it, these things are a goddamn disaster. The vast majority of these screens do not provide enough information on the heroes they are for. They don't provide any numbers, are often straight up missing key pieces of information, and the descriptions that are there are more akin to storytelling descriptions you'd read in a book. These things need a lot of work, and luckily for us, they're already being worked on and are set to be revamped in the near future, with all sorts of key information being added. Judging from the single image we've received so far though, it's going to be hard to say if they're on track to hit the nail on the head, since they showcased one of the more simpler abilities to communicate. They've told us the cooldown, damage numbers and their conditions, damage type, extra effects and details, and outlined applicable CC properties. For charge, this looks pretty good. The only thing I would make a point to add to this specifically is the cast time, as whether something is instantaneous or not can be a bit important to know. These are supposed to be equal to, if not better than what we have displayed on the wiki pages. Now, we've put in a bit of extra effort to go above and beyond with our detailing. Some stats are just there because we can put them in. But that's fine, the wiki is a third-party resource. We can be overly detailed about it, because that's the whole point. I only hope that when it comes to showcasing the more complex weapons and abilities like Ana's rifle, Doomfist rocket punch, or just about all of Symmetra, that they take an elevated level of care to ensure that every single relevant piece of information is presented. They need to include damage and healing numbers, alongside their fall-off and any conditional applications. Specifying projectile and damage types are also equally as important. Any unique mechanics an ability may possess, such as CC powers, invulnerability or cleanses, damage boosting or reduction, or any other random utilities they may have, are also things the players need to know about. Now, depending on the hero and the ability, that's going to be a lot of info, which is why showcasing such a simplistic ability has me a little worried. Perhaps we could have variations to these screens depending on when we are in the game. I don't want someone swapping mid-game only to sit in spawn because they have to read a small essay to figure out what the fuck Symmetra does. Having heavily detailed and comprehensive notes would be really good in the practice range and even in the pre-game phases before being let out of spawn. For mid-game, something significantly more condensed and simplified would be more fitting, so players can hot swap and still have the crucial information they need to play the hero. Hell, we could keep it condensed by default, but require the player to interact with each weapon or ability for their hero for a more comprehensive details like what they do in Paladins. Those are some ways we should improve the existing tools currently in the game. Having the F1 screens updated would probably be enough to satisfy the community and jumpstart a plethora of self-improvement and learning journeys, but we could absolutely go even further. Branching out to more specific tutorial type tools, I have two major ideas that would dramatically help everyone. We should see a small set of tutorials implemented to outline each role's main goals and ideas in the battlefield. And most crucially, we should have tutorials on resources and control to more explicitly outline and teach the core loop of the game to everyone that engages with it. These are of course major projects to undertake and implement, and could even be considered unrealistic, especially the role tutorials. While it could be quite simple to cover the general ideas for DPS and support, I'm not so sure a generalized tank role tutorial would work, given how radically each different tank's goals are achieved, and the fact that tanks don't exactly have a clearly defined identity the same way supports and DPS do. For example, DPS aim to do damage and secure kills. Their job is as simple as that. Any additional clarification or specificity is just an extension of that. Supports heal their team and provide assistive utilities for them to work with. Also simple, a little more hands-on, but again, additional clarification is just an extension. Tanks... what do tanks do? The most common phrase I see when describing tanks is, tanks create space. Okay, cool. That's not a simple idea to convey, and I can do that just as well playing a DPS or a support. So what makes tanks different aside from their insane HP difference? Tanks can't be described as succinctly as the other two roles, because it is significantly more complex to play and encompasses a combination of jobs from both other roles. There is no real definition like what the other roles have, but general community perception seems to be that tanks are the guardians of the team, so to speak. They are the core, the backbone. They work with everyone to ensure that they can do their jobs and fill the gaps where the teammates can't. I once heard someone describe the concept of tanks with this line of thought. Tanks are a fluid concept. The tank is whoever is drawing the most aggression in a given moment. Sometimes Lucio is the tank, sometimes Tracer. So what makes actual tanks tanks then? They perform that definition more often than the rest of the team. I have no solid source for where this quote originally came from, but I also can't fault the logic. It's the only definition that fits given how radically the tank role's power can change on a patch by patch basis. Now, this is as far as these two concepts can go. I see a lot of suggestions for individual hero tutorials built into the game. But no, if the developers did that, they would absolutely be boxing players into playing heroes in hyper-specific ways. Not to mention that tutorials of this nature would need to be adjusted on a patch-by-patch basis as interactions across the game change, and that's just way too much wasted dev time. Having the player base figure out new heroes on their own allows them the freedom to place them into the existing complex network of the game theory in a more accurate and holistic way. That's all the game realistically needs to have top-tier foundational learning tools for the players to engage with. I say that's all, like it's not that much, but the reality is everything I've just covered would take a metric shit ton of work and an absurd amount of time to actually implement correctly. If Blizzard wanted to take the concepts of learning tools further, they could modify the Hero Mastery section, or add a new section for more advanced hero tutorials and guides. Doing this adds an easily accessible tool to push players even further by giving them significantly more advanced information, drills, and guidance on how they can play a hero of choice. They could even have these guides endorsed by content creators and pros as a type of collaboration, creator spotlight, or other promotional marketing thing. They could take it a step further and tie cosmetics, voice lines, or other awards into these learning tools to further incentivize players to utilize them and learn the game better. I'm giving you guys free content here, come on, get cracking. Well-made tools built into the game create reliable quality control and set a higher baseline standard for the developers to measure and interpret. A higher baseline will also further drive and create better discussion around the game. Think of these foundational tools as, well, the foundation for everything you do with the game. The more core concepts these tools cover, the more there is for the player base to leap off of and explore, which will inherently cause all branches to become more complex, deeper, and nuanced, rather than remaining generally simplistic and surface level. The developers already believe this game is more competitively oriented than it is casual, and this sentiment is backed up by the wins grant double progress mechanic applied to everything in the game where possible.
I don't think Overwatch itself is the game that we are trying to peg all the way on one side of that. Like, and if you're saying, like, let's say the right side of that graph is the most competitive you can get and the left side's the least, we are closer to the right. I don't think we're in the middle or anything like that. So it's like we treat our game as a competitive experience.
But I will still argue the opposite. This game is far more casual than it will ever be competitive, and I believe it should be approached that way. Education in any context is a vitally important thing to have, be it work, studies, or just a hobby. Having the knowledge to further pursue and engage with something more innately elevates a person's experience with it. When it comes to game education, I believe a more comprehensive and interactive education would massively enhance a player's experience with the game, and would also have a profound effect on the communities surrounding those games. I believe that better, more accessible learning tools for Overwatch are the key to long-term improvement, not just for the players, but for the game overall. After all, quality teachers and curriculums serve as the bedrock for every future step generations take to progress. Why isn't that logic applied to games? Food for thought. Thanks for watching.